our biggest concern and what we want to avoid with the approach to AI in Australia is we want to avoid a situation that limits small businesses and their employees' access to AI. At the end of the day, large businesses will always have the access. They'll build their proprietary models in-house.
For the employee membership, everybody is trialing AI and AI tools in many different forms, and not everybody understands the consequences of data leaks and data sovereignty and data management and privacy guidelines.
I see the role of AI as making our lives either going to automate away all our problems and live in utopia, or it's Armageddon for small business owners. At the end of the day, you're expected to juggle 15 different balls and wear 20 different hats. We're kind of in almost the Bitcoin snake oil era of AI right now, where it really is that let's just slap AI into it.
Before we get started, please subscribe so that you never miss an episode of our cutting-edge contemporary conversations. Thank you.
Welcome, Will. How are you?
Good. Yeah, can't complain. It's been busy for sure, but getting through it.
Thank you for your time and thank you for being involved at the AI conversation we are having nationally. Before we delve into the details of your views and public stance or public policy stance, I would like to share a bit more about you and your backdrop and your experience.
Look, about me, I've got a pretty diverse background, I suppose. So born in Papua New Guinea, of all places, lived there till I was 8 years old, with expat parents, and then in the US for 13 years, and have been in Australia for the past 17, 18 years now. Originally studied anthropology of all things. I think I'm one of the many of us that graduated and never really used our degrees. So graduated in the GFC with an anthropology degree, which wasn't the most employable thing in the world. Then went back and kind of overcorrected, getting a master's of urban and regional planning. Haven't used that one either, and honestly kind of fell into COSBOA one day, 5-6 years ago now, and I've been here ever since.
If you can talk a bit more about the organization you're involved with and just expand the comment for the audience and what kind of work you're doing.
Yeah, so COSBOA, or Council of Small Business Organizations Australia. So the reason we were founded ultimately is we thought there was a gap in small business representation in Australia, specifically exclusively small business representation. There are a lot of groups that I think can do an excellent job at representing small businesses, but inevitably they also represent big businesses, and those tend to be bigger contributors, so they often take up more of the conversation. So founded exclusively to represent small businesses. Now, what that looks like is we've got two primary arms of the organization now. One is the advocacy, which is our core function, and that is working directly with government, consulting our member organizations on what issues are impacting their small business members, and trying to, I think you can boil down 90% of our policy and advocacy to keep it simple. So just trying to make it easier for small businesses in Australia and make sure they get a fair shake. The other branch of COSBOA that's developed particularly over the past 5 to 10 years is our programs side. So that's the more direct support to small business. So we run several major grant programs, including cyber wardens. The idea is that similar to a fire safety officer, first aid officer, etc. Every small business should have a cyber warden in their business, and then lots of other training, education style major programs. But ultimately, supporting small business in Australia really is our goal.
And how do you also give me a bit of a definition how to define small business? Because it's always the definition of small business varies from which state you are, or a federal, and legislation also. So every legislation might define small business very differently. So, and that's another challenge to understand. So just tell me what's the broader definition of small business, and how do you try to aggregate across states and territories and federally the broader definition which should cover a small business across Australia?
Look, this is a bit of an advocacy focus of ours at the moment, because you're absolutely right. There's 100 different definitions of small business in Australia. Talking about all those grant programs we do, each one has a different definition of what counts as a small business for KPIs, for example. Different legislation will define it as under X million turnover, under 19 FTE. The definition we're putting forward publicly is basically we want the definition to be 50 or under FTE, trying to standardize that across states and federal, because you're absolutely right, it's just a quagmire as a small business, even knowing whether I'm considered a small business in this context or that, and I might be considered in 5 contexts and not in the other 10, which is terribly confusing.
And one of the things which talks did a lot of talk about that in Western Australia is the payroll tax and the ceiling of at what number of employees you move into paying the payroll tax to the state. So that's another sub-segment of many of the challenges when you how you define small business.
Yeah, absolutely, and I mean it's another reason you get a different definition for small business from the APS versus the ATO versus various specific legislation. As a small business owner, how are you meant to keep track of that? But in reality, you need to know what's available to you as well as to know what you have to comply with ultimately.
A good mix of a thriving nation is, yes, you need to have a larger thriving nation in terms of economy. Is you have large organization, but you also have a thriving small business and then mid-sized business providers across all categories of sectors. What do you think is the ecosystem around so that a small business can thrive in Australia? How can the ecosystem be worked upon to create more opportunities to start a business and then keep the business?
Yeah. Look, I think, as I said earlier, with our kind of policy focus, you can boil 90% of our policy down to keep it simple. And I think that really is key, because for small business owners, at the end of the day, you're expected to juggle 15 different balls and wear 20 different hats. You have to be the HR professional, you have to be the tax professional, and you have to be the retail, advertising, marketing, everything. And then you add all this confusion of, this definition applies here, this definition applies there. It just becomes too complicated. So it's easy to say, well, reduce red tape is really the core of that. But at the end of the day, I think each individual situation just comes down to, let's have right-sized legislation, not legislation for legislation's sake, and wherever possible, keep it as simple as possible.
Because sometimes the legislations are designed to counteract the exceptions in the room, as in that because there are some bad individuals or organizations who are using a part of the current legislation. So to counteract these exceptions, you push the legislation to become more harder. But the exceptions, to manage the exceptions, the average person has to follow what the exceptions should be following. So, and that model of making new legislation are coming up. What's your observation on that?
Look, as far as I think particularly interesting in the AI context, so far I think it's been promising, the approach of largely right-sized legislation that is targeting the right level of business. Look, exceptions are a natural, easy way to go in terms of making small businesses exempt from certain things. That said, that can add to the confusion again, because there's a whole education messaging piece that's needed around that, as well as, again, the different definitions of small business and knowing whether you're exempt and in which cases. I think really core to it is the small businesses, look, as much as possible, treating them with empathy and compassion and having right-sized consequences and a bit of benefit of the doubt when it comes to enforcement as well. I think that's something that the ATO, though they get a bad rap a lot, have actually been pretty good at in recent times, is looking at the intention behind the actions. So I think upcoming Payday Super is a good example. If a small business is trying to do the right thing, but they misunderstood it because it's complicated legislation, as long as they intend to fix their actions, to me there shouldn't be a consequence for that.
For your membership, everybody is trialing AI and AI tools in many ways and form, and not everybody understands the consequences of data leaks and data sovereignty and data management and privacy guidelines completely, because yes, there's a tick box on the tool that says that we control the data, we manage the data, right? So you can't outsource privacy in some cases, not all the cases. You can outsource sometimes, but you can't outsource all the privacy responsibilities as an organization you have. How do you see the role of AI, and what are the key challenges your members are talking to you about AI?
Look, if I had to boil it down, I would say, in a general sense, I see the role of AI as making our lives easier. Now that is through productivity, et cetera, et cetera. I think where we've a bit fallen down in the kind of public narrative, media narrative, and even political discourse around AI is that, it's this tendency to go to the extremes with it, right? It's either going to automate away all our problems and we'll live in utopia, everything will be wonderful, or it's Armageddon / we want to bury our heads in the sand. I think partly as a result of that, there's all this discussion around the major new threats of AI, and there's no question that threats are exacerbated and increased by AI, but I actually think the way we've talked about it is taken away from people's understanding, because ultimately, yes, threats are increased, but it's the same threats we've always had, right? You identified the big one is data privacy, and the simple fact is you're putting more data than you ever did before into something because it gives you something useful back, and that comes with increased risk. But I don't think a lot of people understand that, because there's this bogeyman out there of all these new big threats, but they're not new, they're just bigger than they were before.
And from a membership base, could you also talk about what's the ground up advocacy work you do, and specifically from cybersecurity, and as you talked about cyber wardens, what kind of training programs you're running, and because every training program is solving essentially a problem which you are observing with the membership and what feedback you're receiving. So how do you start the first step of either surveying or getting the understanding of what's the challenges, what are the gaps at this stage?
Look, it's a lot of just on the ground engagement for us. So the way we function is all of our all our members are themselves member organizations. So it's the pharmacy guilds, lottery news agents, hair stylists, etc. of the world. Now through those we can therefore represent quite a significant swath of small businesses. The way we keep across issues ultimately is...
So you are more peak of peaks.
Yeah, exactly. And it's through the regular engagement with those members. So we have regular roundtables every fortnight with members and stakeholders, and just have very frank Chatham House rule conversations around what is impacting the different industries. So at the moment, obviously, petrol, energy is a very dominant factor. Things like skills shortage have traditionally been a big one and still are. And through that, plus our research through programs, that all informs our advocacy. And I think core to that is because we've got that almost degree of separation from small businesses, but ultimately we were founded to exclusively represent small businesses. It's really key that we remain a small business ourselves, and that's part of why we have this network of members, because we can pull on experts from different fields as needed without having to grow to 60, 70, 80-person team ourselves, because I think very quickly you could lose touch with small business if we became that. Whereas currently I experienced all the joys and negatives of being a small business.
Are you working on any specific point of view on the National AI Center published the AI paper, which is a broad guidelines on structures and procedures and processes you can implement in your business? How do you see it's called the National AI Plan? What's your observation on that, and how are your members using that on a regular basis?
Look, early stages, the proof will be in the pudding with implementation for sure from a government policy and legislative perspective. That said, generally I'm pretty positive on what they've come out with. I think it's largely right-sized solutions and it's largely risk-based as well. Our biggest concern and what we want to avoid with the approach to AI in Australia is we want to avoid a situation that limits small businesses and their employees' access to AI, because ultimately it would be very easy, I think, to have a knee-jerk response and overcorrect through legislation and red tape, over managing the use of AI. At the end of the day, large businesses will always have the access. They'll build their proprietary models in-house, do what they need to do. And I think there's a real opportunity, as long as access remains equitable, to level the playing field for small businesses and reduce some of that burden of having to wear the 20 different hats. That said, I think this is where it's become a messy environment of we're kind of throwing AI into everything and anything at the moment. And so it's figuring out where it's useful and where it's not. And again, that's just another thing for small businesses to try and figure out.
And what do you see the possibilities of, for example, there's some tools we are trying to outsource in a tool to become agents, and they are interacting and responding with clients on a regular basis, and they're becoming the front end. So what kind of risks do you see, and what kind of liabilities one would have to worry about?
Yeah, I mean, look, this is an open discussion point for sure at the moment. Is things, I think the classic example is the customer service agent that promises a 90% discount after back and forth. Now, it's a bit of a difficult one, because I think a lot of it has to actually come down to whether the person interacting with the agent is acting in good faith, because at the end of the day, we can put all the safeguards in the world we want around it, but if someone knows what they're doing and is good at prompting, they will be able to rewrite essentially how the AI is functioning and get what they want. So there's some balance between just flat out, because I don't think the appropriate response is to just flat out ban chat agent support, for example. But there's some gray area there in figuring out, okay, well then how would you identify whether someone's acting in good faith, et cetera. In some cases it's easy if the person has a 30-minute chat history of trying to convince it to teach them how to make meth, right? Then obviously they're acting in bad faith. But it's figuring out where that line is drawn.
And where do you see the responsibility on some kind of AI rig or regulations or AI structures? Is it federal? So currently federal government is talking about the National AI Plan. They have a department called National AI Center, but not all state and territory governments have a portfolio of AI, but few of them have a Ministry for AI / digital economy. So how do you see that playing out in different states and territories? The evolution of understanding, the evolution of the language, because the state economic output is also via the state small businesses. So if you can't cater to a bigger challenge of the state economic output, which is small businesses, you might not be able to understand intimately what they're going through.
Look, in an ideal world, I think it's all standardized across states and territories as well as federally. I think the best model in an ideal world would be clear guidance from federal that then goes down to the state level. I think in reality, it'll be similar to a lot of things where we're going to end up with a somewhat fragmented system. I think AI provides an opportunity to solve some of the symptoms or issues with how fragmented our system has become with these different regulations that apply in one state and not another, but it requires cleaning and training agents based on specific knowledge bases. So I do think there's going to be a role for the states, as long as we don't have the full standardization that we want, but I think we'll never get to manage the knowledge bases and the way they're publishing their information in order to be able to train useful agents that can provide support to small businesses.
Because things are evolving so fast, so quickly, and you can't create standards and you can't create some form of regulation or structures to ever-changing environment, which is AI just keeps on evolving. The new agents, the new tools which are coming is mind-boggling. So how do you see that? How does standards match up to the changing, very frequently changing solutions?
Look, I think at the end of the day, it's realizing that the vast majority of things are already covered by existing standards and legislation, while they might not be specific to AI. I haven't yet run into an issue anyone's raised that isn't covered under current legislation. So I feel like there's a bit of a solution looking for a problem there.
If you have to just forward project from a membership again point of view, what safeguards and mechanisms you are / training you are building right now? Are you working with the membership so that you uplift the skill level and across all membership?
Yeah, so the big one for us is working with both membership as well as through our programs on the practical implementation of AI. Because as I said, we've ended up in this, we're kind of in almost the Bitcoin snake oil era of AI right now, where it really is that let's just slap AI into it. It's AI powered, it's AI enabled, but did that actually add anything to the experience, or did I immediately go to use that agent for what it seems like it should be used for and it couldn't do it? Which I think is, to be frank, the majority of experiences with AI enabled products these days. So it's just talking to people about, okay, this is where AI is useful, this is where it's not. And in a lot of cases, it's useful when paired with a lot of traditional technologies, scraping, other automation processes, and then there's a step of AI. It's not automating away everything with just AI.
As an exec of the peak body, what are the things what's your messages from your small business point of view for them to be aware of, and then how should they take this journey if they're not introduced to or they're resistant to be using new technology to be more productive?
Look, our core message is at the end of the day, this is a tool like any other, right? It is a very useful tool and it's a very advanced tool, but it's excellent at certain things, not at others. There aren't new risks, but it does increase the risk of existing things like data leaks, etc. And there are things that it's good at and things that it's not. And in an ideal scenario, we're talking to specific industries and pointing to, okay, here's a specific use case for you, right? Inventory management, but be it. This is where it's quite useful. And I think it's getting people's foot in the door because, as I said, so many people have had that initial negative experience with AI where it's been used in a use case that it actually doesn't add value. And so they say, oh, well, this is useless or don't trust it anymore. And it's figuring out where it's useful, where it's not, really. So it's that practical implementation side, which I think is, to be frank, really lacking, particularly from a lot of the major tech companies, ironically.
In conclusion, if you can talk a bit more about broader leadership lessons you have gathered across your career, and how do you see leading a peak body brings the goods and the bads?
Oh, that's a good question. Look, leadership lessons for me, big ones, definitely, empathy and I think understanding who you're working with is massively important. To me, if you want the best out of people, you have to have a focus on the people and you have to understand who you're working with for and who's working for you. I think without that and without understanding what's motivating people, you're never going to get the best from them. I'd say biggest lessons for me have ironically probably been traditional lack of desire to engage in conflict, so it's becoming comfortable with that over my work journey, and comfortable having hard conversations. And beyond that, it's really realizing, particularly as a leader, you're not the expert in everything. In fact, in most things, I'm not the expert, and you're surrounding yourself with people who are experts in those things to make up for your deficiencies. And if that's the case, then you need to listen to those people as well.
Thank you, Will. Thanks a lot.
Always glad to help.